Hello everyone. I know some people are on the summer vacation watching this from Australia or other parts of the lower hemispheres. So regards from cold New York, frigid New York. The colder it gets, the more power we have to warm up the cold. Because we live in a very cold universe that even when it's warm, it can be a cold universe, if you know what I mean, right? So maybe there are sometimes the seasons have to remind us not to live in that delusion. But the mission and purpose of our lives, as the Torah teaches us, and I focus on every week, this Wednesday night class, is that we have the power to illuminate and to warm our environments. And in this world, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. So you're either contributing to making things colder and more detached and more hostile, or you're part of warming, thawing factor, an agent that helps warm and illuminate. So it'd be a good way to ask yourself the question, who are you? Are you helping warm and illuminate those that you meet, or the other way around? Or are you in the undecided group? You know, like the guy that said, I used to think I'm indecisive and now I'm not so sure. So there's also a group. I would like to believe that we are all have chosen the mission and the objective to actually, wherever we go, to ignite a spark, to use the words of the Kabbalists, to illuminate, to touch someone, to bring a little light in a dark place, and to bring a little warmth in a cold place. So I wish that upon everyone here. And the more you're able to do that, the more it comes to feed you back in return. The dividends are even more than your investment. So, the subject of this class is psychology and religion. Are they compatible? So I remember a number of years ago, someone had some access to public access TV and decided to film this class, a series of these classes, in front of a live audience, but it was being broadcast on cable TV. And the way the format was structured, the way the producer structured was, after I gave my talk for a half hour, 45 minutes, the audience was invited to ask a question. So I remember a gentleman gets up and he asked the following question. He says, what is your opinion, he said, Rabbi Jacobson, of the American Psychiatric Association's recent finding or recent debate in their annual conference? The American Psychiatric Association debated this issue, and they could not come to a consensus whether religion is just plain delusional or is an actual form of psychosis. These were the two options. And he wanted my opinion on the matter, which I found to be quite humorous, to be honest. So I said, this was on live TV, so I said, look, I would ask the psychiatrist a question in return. Do they beat their wives with a bat or with a chain? Of course they're going to say, who says I beat my wife? Yeah, but that's the same thing as saying, religion for sure is a problem. The question is it just delusion, or is it an actual clinical, pathological disease? So I just found those two options to be extremely arrogant. It's like anyone says something. Some people could say the same thing about psychiatry. Some people argue psychiatrists are the ones that need psychiatrists more than anyone else, and that's maybe they go into that field. By trying to heal others, they end up healing themselves, or maybe not. So I met another, just to begin with a little light in the light spirit. So I met a fellow who I knew for many years, and he used to be a therapist. I meet him. So how's it going? Great. How's the work, helping souls? He says, no, I changed my job. What do you do today? I work in an advertising agency. And he comes up with concepts. So I said, how'd you go from therapy to advertising agency? So he says, I'm doing exactly the same thing. I am a master of human emotions. Before I was helping heal them, now I'm helping manipulate them. So those are his words. He says, because that's what advertising is. How do you manipulate the people's emotions to go buy something? So it's like getting into your consciousness, into your psyche. You see an ad, it evokes something primal, the pain principle, the pleasure principle. So I said to him, very nice. So, and then I'm sure in a few years from now you're going to retire from that and go heal all the people you manipulated. It's like they say the people who are manufacturing radar detectors are also the manufacturers of radars. So they're busy. They're both building the mice and the mouse traps. So they build a better radar, then they build a better radar detector. And it's a vicious cycle, and you make money on both ends. It's very cool. It's like, I don't know if you know, many of the best tax consultants, I think General Electric has like a battery of like 1,200 attorneys that all they're busy with is finding tax breaks. And 90% of their employees are from former IRS agents. So the best place to find loopholes in the tax code is people who wrote the tax code, or people who know it very well. So this is the vicious cycle, the humor of our lives. And sometimes you wonder whether you're not part of one big conspiracy. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so I'm not going down that road. But the idea of objective, real understanding of our psyches and what's intention is a very interesting question on both ends. So I've been actually addressing this quite aggressively in the last few months. I've always discussed it. For me, it was always fascinating, because ultimately, Judaism, Torah, is about the study of the human condition, study of human nature, study of the soul. So, I wouldn't necessarily call Judaism psychology, but, most therapists are Jews, I think. That's a separate issue. But the point is, we've been around. If we could master and bottle the formula of survival that Jews had, and we suffered the greatest, highest levels of stress and anxiety and suffering, oppression in every possible way, non-acceptance by our communities. Who more collectively than the Jews have basically every pathological issue, psychological issue we've gone through. We were in Egypt thriving, and then we were enslaved and developed a whole that. We've been through country after country, empire after empire, everyone trying to exploit, kill, pillage, etc., etc. And we're here. So I would think that the greatest study of psychology would be trying to understand the Jew. And the truth is, many scholars have always seen that the Jew, this strange Jew, this entity that traveled through so much of history, has seen so much and still standing. It's a very fascinating study, and definitely psychological insights. Now, Freud considered now of course he's lost that same glamour that he had when he was on the scene, but like Freud, the Jew, introduced the concept of the unconscious, which turns psychology into a whole new study in the last century. So he's been discredited by many others, different theories and different psychological approaches. But you find that the Jews and psychology go very much hand in hand. And all you got to do is watch one Woody Allen movie and you realize that the PhDs in neurosis are the Jews. There's no question about that. They've got the most paradoxes and contradictions. And Woody Allen's like the best. He's like he epitomizes, he embodies all that is crazy about the neurotic Jew. A lot of brains, but doesn't always know how to fit in socially. All those what we call dissonances and inconsistencies, where there's things aren't smooth. And then, of course, you listen a little to what's his name? The comedian, the Yiddish comedian. Jackie Mason, and then Seinfeld. And basically, they say the comedy in today's sitcoms is essentially Jewish comedy. Mahler is Jewish. Lenny Bruce was, of course, a giant in his own way. And some say, and some Jews say as well, that there's a very thin line between tragedy and comedy. The joke goes, tragedy is what happens to you, comedy is when it happens to someone else. But there's a very thin line between the two, because the same thing, if you look at the things we laugh at, go a step further, and it's a tragedy. There's a little twist, it's funny. Because it's about always seeing the irregular, not seeing the cracks in society, the inconsistencies, the hypocrisies, and so on. So it was always fascinating to me, this parallel. And at the end of the day, on a serious note, to me it ended up being, if the Torah is God's blueprint for life, who created the psyche in the first place? Who can give us a better x-ray of our souls than the Torah itself? So, on the other side of the coin, we have what we call modern psychology. We have psychology. Is it a science? Is it not a science? It's still a matter of debate. All psychologists and psychiatrists say it's ultimate science. Many others say it's pseudoscience. David Brooks wrote an article in 2013, last year, excellent article about this topic. Because why is it called pseudoscience? Not to dismiss that thousands of people have been helped through this study of psychology and its applications and interventions, but because you're dealing with intangibles. When you're studying, for example, anything of matter, you can ultimately dissect it. It's true on a subatomic level and in certain distant areas we've never seen the quantum dimensions, but still there's extrapolation, there's experiments that can be verified. When it comes to psychology, though there are many, many studies, and there's no question that there's a logic behind it, but it's far, far less tangible, and therefore is far more prone to so many different opinions. And look at reality. In the last 100 years, I'm not talking 1,000, you show me every student of a master ends up disagreeing with his master. Some completely, some partially. Why? Because you don't find the same thing in physics or mathematics. In mathematics, you could have, once in a while, a new brilliant theory that upsets the theories before it, but not on an ongoing basis. So some say because psychology is relatively new. It's only 100 years old, if you count Freud as being the first that systemized it in some type of therapeutic way or some type of scientific way. Some argue that. In other words, it would be like the first 100 years of physics. Others argue, no, because the science itself, or the study of the soul, the psyche, whatever you want to call it, is far, far more complicated than the study of the atom even. Which you see even in neuroscience, the study of the brain, which is also very complicated. The study of the brain is not like the study of, let's say, the muscular structure of the human being. And then we're not even getting into account that every person is different. The same intervention psychologically for one person doesn't work for another person. Now that's also true in medicine. Not every medication works. Some people are allergic, some people don't respond, etc. But it's not as extreme because you're dealing with far more, as I said, tangibles. Now, lately, due to what's called neuro and pharmaceuticals, new types of chemicals, new type of medication that understands the chemicals within the brain have definitely changed some things, but it's still not a full understanding. It's knowing that we have different levels of chemicals, either when we get excited, or sexual drive, or hormones, and so on. The point being is, it's a complicated subject to talk about, and I can tell you, as a first-hand witness, that whenever I write about it, I always get adamantly opposite opinions, attacked from both ends. From religious people, are very wary and very threatened by psychological stuff. They say, we have a Torah, God told us how to live our lives, we've managed for thousands of years, we don't need a whole new slew of experts to tell us what makes a healthy, happy human being, what defines a good marriage, what it means to educate children. That's one side of the coin. Then, from the psychological perspective, religion, some people say religion is very nice for religious people. Don't mix religion with psychology. Psychology is in the domain, just like you don't mix religion with heart surgery. Don't mix psychology, belongs to the domain of experts and professionals, and are offended when somebody suggests that psychology is a lot of it is speculation, and a lot of it is arbitrary, subjective, etc., etc. Just recently, in the last few weeks, I've been writing a few articles. I wrote an article last week called "Is Psychology Good for Us?" And there too, right away, elicits both extremes. Now, when I write it, I always try my best to be balanced. I'm not trying to advocate one or the other, because I'm not suggesting, and I'm not going to suggest now as well, that it's black and white. That everything can be found purely in the Torah. We'll talk about that. On the other hand, to suggest psychology is some type of independent, objective science like mathematics, it's not. It's not mathematics. Mathematics, I wonder why I mentioned mathematics, because mathematics is considered by some as the perfect science. And what do I mean by perfect? Not it's a perfect science. It means it's numbers. And numbers is the most rounded, the most sound type of science. Very little speculation. Almost none. Actually, it was Gödel, the great mathematician in the last century, who proved something which was like anathema to science, to mathematics. He proved that even the great mathematics, which was always seen as that perfect science, because it's about equations and about 2 + 2 = 4, etc. He proved that mathematics is also built on a non-rational axiom. That there are certain principles, especially the foundations of mathematics. He proved, not he theorized. He proved it with mathematical formulas that there's some things can be proven in math. Which, if you studied math, and I've studied math over my years, math is all about proofs. Everything is provable. I'm not suggesting math is a solution for all our problems, because math does not solve the equation of love, or the equation of depression, or the equation of anything that's emotional. So math doesn't speak about the world of the psyche. But in the world of emotions, in the world of not emotions, in the world of numbers, in the world of what we call empirical observation, empirical measurement, which is the right word I was looking for. Empirical measurement, everything is mathematics. Physics requires math, chemistry requires math, biology, mathematical equations. A quantifiable equation, sometimes today known as an algorithm. You do these steps, 1,000 steps, 1,000,000 steps, 5 steps, you always get these results. Algorithms are basically mathematical language. It's a mathematical language. A plus B minus C, except in this case, plus this case, minus this case, results so and so. And when they get sophisticated, it's a whole algorithm that includes hundreds of scenarios, every possible scenario, etc. These are mathematical formulas at their best. So when Gödel came and established, welcome, one of the senior alumni. So when Gödel came and established that mathematics is based on a formula on an element that can't be proven, everyone went up in arms. But he was the great Gödel. He's like one of the greatest mathematicians in history. And now it's acceptable. And math actually prides itself with that. Because math now is also accepting, it's true. Because the question is, the big conundrum question, philosophical one, is logic logical? Logic will dictate that logic is logical. But that's assuming that everything is run by logic. If there's a reality outside of logic, so is logic logical? That's a circular argument, which is you can't answer that. You can say within the system of logic is logical. Or as Einstein or others have put it, that you can't change the system from within the system. If you're following the rules of the system, the rules dictate your system. When you look at it from outside the system, then you can look from different eyes. So mathematics has now seen Gödel was not trying to undermine, by the way, the accuracy of math. He was just trying to be honest in understanding that the foundations of anything, what we call in Hebrew, is a muskel rishon. You have to have certain accepted axioms that do not necessarily have any type of empirical proof. I'll give you another one that people are not even aware of. It's the most simple of all. All science is built on an axiom that has nothing to do with science. That axiom is that the simplest theory is always the one you choose. All scientists have a silent agreement that is what we accept. You can have 5 theories to explain a phenomenon, and the scientists will gravitate to the simplest one. And when you ask them why, they'll say, that just makes most sense to us, and that's what we all agreed to do. And as long as the theory works, that's what we do. And we don't start saying, maybe there's another theory, unless this theory doesn't work. And there's reasons for it. There's also not irrational. I call it super rational. It's not irrational. It's stating that you have to start somewhere. You cannot start, or else you'll never get anywhere. You have to start with some agreement. We're agreeing on A, B, C, and now let's develop. Now you can go back to the axiom and say, is this axiom sound or not? But you have to begin, there's no conversation that doesn't begin with an axiom. So my point that I'm trying to make here is that even great mathematics, which was, like I said, the purest in the sense of the most tangible and empirical measurement, also is based on certain foundations that are not purely mathematical. But fine, that has not weakened math, it's only strengthened it. As a matter of fact, as I said before, today to understand that does not make the logic of it less logical. It just means that we know that there's states that are beyond our regular logic. But to go back to psychology, so the big question, and it's almost like the elephant in the room that nobody likes to talk about, because whenever I meet psychologists, I like to have an open conversation. This is like a real difficulty with them. Like if you start saying, is this a perfect science? So obviously perfect, no. But is it science? Everyone, it's not a science in the regular definition of science. If you look at real scientists, some of them will look at psychology almost like doctors look at homeopathy, or at chiropractic. It'd be even better. That doesn't mean there's no value to it, but they say, this is pseudo medicine. You have to have believe in it a little, etc., etc. Some completely dismiss it as like a placebo effect, which has also been proven. If you think this pill is going to affect you, it can affect you even if it's made out of water. So in other words, that itself is psychological. And others say there is value, but it's not with quite the same rigor and same studies and tests as other medicine. But the hard thing for most people to deal with is this. It's all subjective. So when you're talking about science, let's talk hard science. Right here's a computer. This computer now works for billions of people. It's proven to be dependable. So whether we understand how a computer works or not, one thing is for sure. I can rely on my computer to the extent, would we rely on it with our life and death? Probably not. But you rely on it for equations. If your calculator says you add up a crazy amount of complex numbers, it adds up, you're not going to probably double check it by hand. Why? Because we learn to rely on it. It may not be, someone will say, how do you know for sure? You'll say, well, enough people have used these calculators. It's built on a system of mathematics. It basically makes sense. They're crunching numbers. We know you can add up numbers. It'll take me maybe a year to figure out a sum total of something. And now the computer's crunching it. So it makes total sense to me, even though I don't know exactly how it works. I remember when I first started using a desktop, or in my days it was 1982, and it was called a North Star. Actually, computers then, the keyboard was built into the computer. It was like you got this little box. Some called it a Commodore. I had a North Star. It was like a little green screen. It looked like from outer space. Actually, the keyboards were the best because they were like really solid state. They were solid, not like these flimsy things. You knocked on an A. It was, Anyway, and it was the first time a word processor. It was like magic. Because I used a typewriter. What's a typewriter? A typewriter, you type on a key. So you see the key striking the paper with, you have a ribbon there with ink. So go, A, B, C. It's all tangible. Suddenly you press an A, and there's no ink, and there's no impression, and there's no nothing. You just press an A, and the A appears on the screen. And then when you see it print out on the printer, it's like, hey, how'd that happen? In the beginning it's a little surprising. Then you just take it for granted, and now it works. So I had a guy that I used to work with, because I was working in publishing. I worked in the Rebbe's talks and so on. So I used to use a typewriter, a physical typewriter. And we had to retype, the whole thing. And you want to change the order of paragraphs. There's no such thing as cut and paste. You simply got to go and either retype the whole thing or cut it apart. I'm sure if you've written papers in those days, you know what kind of hassle it was. And if you had to number things, forget about it. It's all hand numbered. There's no typewriter that had footnoted numbers. The first word processor, I was sitting with one of the printers I worked with. He was this old Hasidic Jew with a big red beard, very was a great guy. His name was Shalom Bar Pevzner was his name. And he says to me, in Yiddish we're speaking, he says to me, what is this thing, this new machine? He says, there's a menschele inside there. There's a little person inside there that when you press an A, he turns it into an A. He couldn't accept it. Because he came from a generation before type. I don't know if you know why when we say typeset. Why is it called typeset? People think it's not just a term. It's typeset because in the olden days, my days too, when I was a kid, my father was a journalist. I used to go to downtown the east side, the Lower East Side, and he was in the Tagmar Journal, which was on the block on East Broadway, near Grand in that area. And on the same block was the Forward, there was the Freiheit, the communist Jewish paper, the socialist Jewish paper, and the so-called mainstream or centrist Jewish paper. The Jews had everything. There was communist Jewish paper. If there's an ism, the Jews are involved. Anyway, so I remember they used to have what was called a linotype. Today you'll only find it in some old museum. A linotype was this big machine. I can't even describe it. It looked like almost like a locomotive, actually. No, really. It was like a very tall contraption that had a small keyboard, but behind it was this big, almost like a tower, and on the side there used to be a vat, literally, of boiling lead. lead. And they used to hang up on a chain a piece of lead, like a bar of lead, that would go into this vat. The lead would melt. And when they would type, what's called typeset, they would set type. You typed on this linotype. So let's say you typed the word type, T-Y-P-E, and it would impress it on this melted lead, and it would cool off, and it would come out this type of like wafer of lead that had the word type. So they would do line by line. It was done by lines with spaces. And then as these lines would come together, someone would set the type by putting it in a type of like a sheet, like a type of frame on a table. They knew how to read backwards, like mirror images, because it was all backwards. And they would set the type, and then they would do the same thing with a picture. It would also be impressed on lead, all backwards, and then they would take this whole page one, let's say, of the paper, put it by a printing press, with ink would go over it, and paper would run through it. And this was the template, or the so-called the basis of that page, and it's just, you could print 1,000 pages, you could print 1,000 newspapers, you could print 1,000,000 newspapers. Everything was done this way. You look at a picture of the New York Times in 1970, you'll see the typeset room was a room like the size of, like the size of Grand Central Station, with literally hundreds, if not thousands, of people sitting at these linotypes, typing away. That's how a newspaper was made. I mean, it's mind-boggling where we are today compared to that. So you can imagine this guy's saying to me, I don't understand how an olive became an olive. A linotype I understand. He said, even a typewriter I understand. But how he really literally said, is there a man inside the computer? He says, I don't trust anything I don't understand. I didn't want to tell him that linotypes you do understand. I'm sure there's plenty of stuff there we also didn't figure out. It was just like Jeff Bezos, when he came out with Amazon. Kindle is Amazon? Or is that Barnes & Noble? Kindle? Came out with the Kindle, so everyone says the downfall of civilization, no more books. So he said, listen, when the printing press came out, they said it was the downfall of civilization, no more manuscripts. And when the first tablets were created, Socrates said, the downfall of civilization, no one's going to ever memorize anything anymore. So he basically made the statement that technology is anything that's created after you were born. So I told this to Rabbi Pevsner. I said to him, for you, a linotype is this simple. Your grandfather would say he doesn't trust linotypes. And he says, no, but this doesn't make any sense. But anyway, he went to his grave, God bless him, never using a computer. He just would not trust it. He did not accept that the person. And the truth is, I frankly don't really understand it either exactly, to be honest. And I don't know if anyone does. But something like this, it works like this. You press an A. That, under the A is no A in there, of course. It creates an electrical, circuit, like pressing a switch. It goes, and then the other end, it turns it into something, with a laser printer, the language, some code that translates, that'll print out like an A. So it's true. It doesn't have quite that tangible thing. But tell me, can you explain television? Right now they're playing tennis in Melbourne, and you can watch it simultaneously here in New York. It's thousands of miles away. It would take you 16, 18 hours to fly there, and you see an image exactly. 24 hours. Okay. Yeah, I've flown there many times. Okay, even better. And sometimes you say to yourself, is there any shift? Maybe there's something happening there that we're not seeing. Or is there something that the image... It's exactly what's happening there. How that happens exactly, we don't really understand. I've talked to them. Even the best scientists don't understand. They know how it works. They know how to replicate it. But to understand, you have to understand something that's invisible. How do you transmit an exact image from there to here simultaneously? That means in some way God created some type of amorphous energy field that can be manipulated to carry images and sounds over very vast distances, basically eliminating the distinctions between time and space that have always defined our lives. That's what it comes down to. And no scientist created this energy field. A sound wave, a light wave is not created by anybody. It was always there. No one knew how to tap into it. Now they know how to. But no one understands exactly how a light wave works. They can't even figure out whether a light wave is a wave or a particle or a combination, etc. And by the way, all this, I'm not suggesting trying to minimize what we know. Look how the world has been changed as a result. So this is not a minimalization of knowledge. I'm just making a point that you need humility when you address science. And what happens is when science becomes arrogant, that's the downfall. And psychology is even more so, because psychology, you're not just playing with machines, you're playing with minds and hearts. So the first thing I want to state that I see the single most important thing, but going back, when you talk about psychology and God and religion and soul, it always presses people's buttons. Like I said, I can't imagine. I get more hate mail when I write about this than about anything else, except of course Obama, which I don't write about, and gay marriage, which I also don't write about. But this topic presses all kinds of buttons, and I know why, because it's talking about, on one hand, it talks about the core of who we are and who defines who we are, and that affects us all. So I want to submit that I think we are in the infancy of understanding the psyche and the soul, and we have to all accept that. And I say that both from a Torah perspective and from a psychological perspective. We're at the infancy. From a modern psychological perspective, let's be honest, psychology as we know it today is barely 100 years old. And it has debates from one extreme to the other. Some people swear by Freud, and some say the whole thing, Freud was a fraud, as someone told me. He was a great marketer, he was smart, he knew how to turn it into a system. Some people say that he didn't even help people. That's the extreme anti-Freud. I'm not going to extremes. You have Carl Jung, who began as a colleague and a friend, a student of Freud's, and then adamant breakup, adamantly disagreeing with Freudian thought. And you have all the others. You have I'm going to go through the whole list of psychologists. So it's fair to say that we know something, but we know a little, not a lot. The little we know happens to be a tremendous amount. You ask most neuroscientists, they'll tell you we know very little about the brain, but the little we know has helped human race in infinite ways. So I'm not dismissing the helping here. I'm just saying where we're still going, the horizons of psychological horizons are just beginning to be explored. Because you're dealing, as I said, with matters of mind, soul, heart, and so on. On the other hand, I will say that there's tremendous stuff you can learn from the Torah. Number one, as I said, the collective Jewish experience, dealing with pain and dealing with love, and the wisdom, the collective wisdom that you find that Jews have documented in the Talmud and in Kabbalah have tremendous insights. In addition, the Torah does claim that it's the blueprint of the soul and psyche. So when you study Kabbalah, you actually have a discussion of what our soul looks like and what our psyche looks like. So to me, when I speak to psychologists, I say to them, wouldn't that be amazing to be able to use your theories and the studies you've made and complement it with what the Torah says? Because I'm not suggesting the Torah, on the other hand, has not developed a methodology, a systemized methodology that can be used in a therapeutic environment. You have individual Torah scholars or authorities that have psychological bent to them, that they know how to apply it and they know how to speak with empathy and understand the human soul and help people. But the Torah has not yet been turned into a system that you can say, here are the methodologies. What do you do when there's depression? What do you do with anxiety? How do you diagnose it? How much should you work hand in hand with a professional psychiatrist or psychologist? Is medication ever an option? These are big questions that are completely like a whole frontier that has yet to be explored. So I'm excited to say that I think I'm part of the exploration. I'm trying my best. Obviously, one person is one person. But I think it's critical for us to really grow in this area, and this is where I think all of us can be part of this, is not to think we're at the final resting place. We haven't figured out. We don't have it figured out. If we haven't figured out, trillions of dollars or billions of dollars wouldn't continue to be spent on therapy and on self-help books. Like they keep pointing out. If every self-help book that goes to the bestseller list tells you how to become happy, why is the next one selling? Because clearly it's not solving the issue. But it is responding to the need. And the need is deep, and we get some answers, and some will say no book will solve your problem. A book will give you some insight. The biggest of all the genre of self-help books, they say the first of them all in the modern age, came out in 1971. It was called The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. This book was on the New York Times bestseller list, if that's a yardstick for you, for like 700 weeks or something. I mean, like a crazy amount of time. The good news, just for the record, the New York Times doesn't tell you that they don't record the biggest bestseller, which is the Bible. Because then the Bible would always be number one every week. That would not work with the philosophy, I guess, of the New York Times. Imagine every week you see the Bible number one, everything else is two. The Bible is consistently the biggest bestseller book in history till this day. More Bibles are sold than any other book. Just for the record. And not by Jews. I should add. Which is ironic. Not that we know who's buying it, but by the numbers, based on the numbers, if Jews were buying, like a Jew says, I already have my Chumash, I don't need to buy another Bible. But, okay. So Scott Peck's book, it's a very good book, but like many best-selling books, I don't know if you know the statistic, most best-selling books have not been read by the people who purchase them. Because it becomes a fad, you got to have this book, doesn't mean you read it. I mean, the short, brief history of time by Stephen Hawking is considered the most best-selling book that nobody's read. But it became like, how could you not have it? And by parties they say, of course, yeah. I don't know what it says in there, but of course I have the book. Like that. So, when you ask people, I saw this a study somewhere, what do you like about the road less traveled? I mean, talking about 700, talking about millions of books. Maybe 30, 40 million books have been sold. I'm not sure of the numbers. So what have you liked about the book? So the consistent line is the first line of the book, because most people read the first line. What's the first line of the book? It's going to be funny, but it says, life is difficult. That's the first line in Road Less Traveled. And people say, that resonated with me. Life is difficult. And I'm ready to pay $15 to be told that life is difficult. Now I know that it's real. I always thought it was the only one. What my point is, I'm not trying to be cynical. I'm trying to point out that that the solutions that we have are far less than our problems. So to suggest that we've come to some type of clear picture of an answer, I don't think anybody suggests that. But the question is, how far are we? We're pretty far. Because you have to look at our society. Since the slew of self-help books, of therapy, where basically, I think they say 2 out of 3 people in the United States go to therapy, or more. What's the numbers? It's very up there, right? Would you say? Does anybody know what therapy is in this room? Okay. So this is a recent phenomenon. Therapy was not prevalent in 1930 and 1940. It existed, but it was just at its infancy. It's today an industry that I don't even know if we know the numbers, because a lot of people don't even admit them to that. So the question is, since we've had therapy, have we become a healthier society? Now, no psychologist wants to hear that question. And I think you can understand why. You don't need to be a psychologist to know why. Right? Because that one second. If it hasn't helped, then what has it done? So of course there's always the answer, it could have been a lot worse if we didn't have therapy. Is that true? And I by no means, I want to make it very clear, loud and clear disclaimer. I'm not coming here to build a case against therapy. Because as we shall discuss, there's plenty of benefits. It has a lot to do with individual therapists. It has a lot to do with their relationship with you. But to make it into some type of objective. Like, for example, you talk about technology, science, this world is a different world as a result of the scientific technologies called physics, computer science, astroscience. We landed on the moon. These are empirical evidence of a benefit. I'm not saying a benefit to the human condition, but a benefit you can see in faster machines, more efficient communications. Medicine. For all, you can say a lot of downside to medicine. Whether antibiotics have really helped us in the long term or not. But longevity in the early 20th century was 45 years old, and now it's double. Indisputable. Now I know the argument could be made, yes, we have much more, but we also are filling people with toxins, and the quality of life is worse, and whatever it may be. And we were breathing the wrong thing and so on. But there are certain things that are indisputable. Yes, the efficiency, you can today press a button and get things you never would have been able to get. But when it comes to psychology, what other measure is there than human welfare? Is the welfare of the society a healthier one? So this is not a blanket type of accusation, it's just, let's be honest about this. My answer is, I don't think it's healthier. And I don't even think of therapy necessarily the reason for it. Because remember, once things become commercial, you ultimately, of course, are invested. If I was a psychologist, I ran a whole clinic, of course I'm invested in saying I could heal everybody. But I'm subjective because it's my business. So it's hard to have. Are there even, what do we call them, watchdogs that watch the psychological community? And then take into account what I said before, that every psychological system, basically almost every major psychologist in the last 100 years, their student broke with them and said that I totally disagree with my teacher. Either totally or partially. Now is that like true, or they just wanted to make a name for themselves and they had to become independent? That itself requires a psychiatric study. How much of is it a dependency? Are they trying to break away from their mentor, parent, etc.? And again, I'm being half cynical here, but that's not my intention to dismiss it. I just want to be honest about it. And I speak as a Jew as well, because as I said, the Torah is a profoundly psychological system. It talks all about, even the Bible. You start reading the story of good and evil in the Garden of Good and Evil. What is that if not a psychological story? Husband, man, woman, a seduction, living forever, knowledge of good and evil, the taste of the forbidden fruit. These are all completely psychological concepts that are the basis, actually, of almost everything we deal with today. The search for Eden, the search for paradise, the search for happiness. It's essentially the biblical story. Okay, God. Some people want to take out the word God, so don't call it search for happiness. So the parallels are tremendous, and there's so much to be said about it. Now, I know I'm talking more about what it's not. Obviously, I'm leading here to try to discuss, in my opinion, the framework that's required to be able to create a healthy, let's call it synthesis, of the best we have in the therapeutic research and psychological research of from the beginning of time, especially last century, and the Torah's input. To me, that's an honest and humble approach of how you grow in this area. So again, it's not about discounting and discrediting what we have. It's being honest about it. I asked a sociologist, he comes here once in a while to this class, he's a pretty well-known, established. I asked him, what's the measure of a healthy society? What are the criteria in today's common, in sociological standards for a healthy society? So he said to me, a few, the pretty predictable ones: standard of living, health insurance, longevity, a whole list of things that how we conquered the illness, a bunch of things that define the GDP, the average income, how you define a healthy society versus a less healthy one. And based on those standards, he told me, we are definitely the healthiest society in history, based on all these factors: financial, health, and so on. Access to medication. Of course, my question was quite loaded, and he said to me, so what would you say? I say, from a Torah's point of view, the measure of a healthy society is in two things. It's really one thing: the welfare of the family, of family life. Children. What kind of children grow up? Are they secure, confident, not fear-driven, or are they full of neurosis and insecurities and all that comes with that? He said to me that very interesting, and I would definitely defer. I think your definition is far better. It wasn't mine. Because it's a real measure. He was talking about society. In other words, it's apples and oranges. His definition of society was meant healthy society, that functional in the physical sense of it. We live long, you have doctors available, you can buy anything you want. And I was talking much more on a psychic, a soul and emotional and psychological level. Relationships. Are relationships better today than they were 100 years ago? So some argue it's exactly the same as it was 100 years ago, except today we know about it. Then it was all a big secret. There was infidelity, same this thing, the same sexual perversions, etc., etc. Maybe. Even if you argue that's it. But better, it's definitely not. That's a pretty much a consensus. So why? Why is that? Because maybe the therapies of our generation, our time, are not really addressing the real issues. Maybe they're dealing with symptoms. Maybe on an individual basis, they give some comfort and consolation to an individual. So someone can say, yes, I've gone to therapy, it's been better for me since. I don't even know if there's statistics. If you took all the people in therapy in the United States and asked them one question, are you better off than you were 5 years ago, like the presidential elections do? Are you better off than you were 4 years ago, or 8 years ago, or 12 years ago, due to the therapy? I'm not talking about due to other factors. I don't know if the number would be better or worse, or no change. I would guess probably worse, to be honest, based on what I see. Now, what does that say? It doesn't say the therapy didn't work, or there was no benefits. It says that there's a lot of groping and a lot of guessing and a lot of speculation and a lot of stuff that is not necessarily really effective. It may be good for someone to express themselves and so on. Now, when I define psychology, I looked it up. Psychology means, it's from the original Latin, Greek, study of the soul. You look in history, who were the healers in history? Until let's call it the Enlightenment, to the scientific industrial revolution 200 years ago. Healers, psychological and physical healers, doctors, were all religious leaders. It always was the same person. The shamans or the priests or the scholars and so on. The healing was in the domain of religion, was in the domain of faith. Like it was the divine ordained power that a human being had to help heal. In the Bible you have it. To go to the Kohen, the Mitzorah, or the others, went to the Kohen, to the priest of that generation. Or the Kohen B'Yamecha, the priest of your times. What happened in the 17th, 18th century? Just like science broke away from religion, and you began the battle between science and religion, began literally a battle between who controls healing. And there was a divorce between those that dealt with what we called soul matters and faith, and those that dealt with what we call scientific approach to things. Now, a lot has been talked about the battle between science and religion, as in science, like matters of evolution or matters of physics, explaining phenomena that once upon a time you thought you only could explain it with religious theories. Today you can explain it with scientific theory. There's less talk, but it's still there, between psychology and religion. But they also had the same split. Look at Freud. He has a whole book on Moses. It's very interesting, his book. You could read that book, you realize the guy never went to yeshiva. But that's a separate issue. And as I mentioned before, you go to any Woody Allen movie, and religion is about neurosis. Like I mentioned before, the American Psychiatric Association's question is religion delusion or full-blown psychosis. Those are the only two options. Which one? Now, I can understand as well that when you meet a lot of religious people, and if they represent religion, you could come to the conclusion that religion is psychosis or neurosis, a lesser version of psychosis. What do they say? The difference between a neurotic, a psychotic, and a psychiatrist. The neurotic builds castles in the air, the psychotic lives in them, and the psychiatrist collects rent from both. And not illusionary rent, real rent. So they're living in castles in the air, and he's actually collecting rent. That's interesting. He turned it, Yeshma, from nothing he created something. So the point is, so when you look at the people, of course, there's no question that when you look at religion and mix it with dysfunctionality, it's a very volatile and even lethal combination. Because a religious person, by definition, is involved in rigid laws. So if you're a healthy person, you know how to handle it. If you're not, suddenly you have a perfect reason to be OCD, impulsive consultant, because you have to know whether you're going to eat the matzah this way or eat that way and lean this way and lean that way. You know the laws. That's Pesach alone. I had Shabbos and kosher, and it's a great. Religion is excellent obsessive material. Because it's about God wants it exactly like this and not like that. And if you don't do that, you cut off, or you'll be cursed or be struck by lightning. So religion is a perfect breeding ground for every neurotic. So you mix the two together, and you got yourself a very unhealthy mix. This by no means should define, however, religion or Judaism. It's just a person where the mix didn't work. It's not working right. And even then, as you'll see, I would not suggest just because somebody's unhealthy, they shouldn't do mitzvahs. You have to find a way to separate the two. If you look at Judaism the way I understand it, and when you look into the original books, it's the healthiest possible system. You could also teach, for example, there's musicians, and you discipline them to teach and learn piano. If they happen to be unhealthy and obsessive, they suddenly become obsessive with the rules of music. So there's nothing to do with religion per se. It's just that religion lends itself, because of its intensity, it lends itself to becoming far out of control if you mix also an unhealthy pathology into it. But this has nothing to do with the Torah per se. So I could understand why scientists, especially who had an anti-religious prejudice in the first place, would see religion as the problem. And this will tell you, there are psychologists who will tell you religion is the problem, religion is the source of all neurosis. Freud said as much. Because it taught you, since you're a young child, you think, what does God want from you? Your whole sexuality is messed up as a result. You can't just be. This is a sin. This is unforbidden. This. If you do this, your organs will fall off. Whatever is taught, and there are those that argue that, which doesn't help the situation, because there's such beauty and depth in Torah, especially in Kabbalah, about psychological things, that if it was embraced, it would literally, in my opinion, transform and revolutionize psychology completely. I'm just identifying this issue, separating the two. So when you talk about psychology and religion, let's talk about psychology and faith. It's far more complicated. Here, look at the reaction. This Dr. Eben Alexander, Eben Alexander is his name? Yeah. Wrote a book called Proof of Heaven, a neuroscientist's experience with near death or something like that, or the afterlife. A neuroscientist. He's a neuroscientist, full-blown, Harvard credentials, impeccable credentials in the world of academic idol worship, or whatever you want to call it. Suddenly he has a near-death experience, and he writes a best-selling book that's still selling like crazy, called Proof of Heaven. So I was looking at the articles about this, and it's pretty much consistent. The book is loved by so many people, because he writes as a neuroscientist would write. He doesn't write like he suddenly, lost his faith in science. He's a scientist. But he cannot deny the experience that he had, and he tries to explain it with his neuroscience. Scientists up in arms, many, not all, the betrayal of Dr. Alexander, of the entire industry of science. Because he had some type of crazy experience, now he's turning science on its head. So if it was written by some religious fanatic, it's very easy to dismiss it. Here it's a scientist. How could you do that? And so on. I read such articles. So I say to myself, one second, why are they sure? How do they know 100% sure that this guy is wrong? I could say, they say, I never had this experience. It's hard for me to believe in heaven. But how do they have this adamance? Wasn't dogma and fanatic dogma like relegated only to religious people? How do scientists suddenly become so dogmatic that they hate a colleague because he said something they find to be problematic? Even if his theories are wrong, so what? In science you have a lot of theories. Since when is why is it a character assassination? So then I say to myself, why? Because this threatens something that they are worshipping. That's why I call it honor. They're worshipping themselves. So this suddenly threatens their whole basis. Because if there is a heaven, or if there is a soul, what does it say about them and their total rejection of it? And I'm not getting to the argument whether proving it or not. It's just interesting study in human condition of what goes on. So as I said, if religious people went on a witch hunt against someone that's challenging their faith, that's common. They have faith, they believe in an absolute thing, and someone's attacking that. So there's no question to me that there are scientists, they call scientism. It's just as dogmatic. You can have a radical atheist who's just as dogmatic as a radical believer. There's no question. That only creates more confusion, because then you don't even know where's the science, where's your personal stuff. If you're talking about a psychological mess, this is a mess. You can't know. Are you telling me science now? You're telling me your opinion? As your opinion God? So that's why I think it's very healthy for all of us to step back and just look at it a little as objectively as we can. I don't think anybody's purely objective, including myself. But I think we can at least step back and say, one second there. That we know we have a psyche and a soul because we know there's something going on that makes us tick. What it looks like, no one has ever seen. Are there studies that many professionals today have done, clinical studies? You see people, there are hundreds of studies, things that have helped people. We know that certain therapies work in certain circumstances. Not always, but that's to be understood. So to try to make an order out of this whole clutter is the first step. And I think it's something that affects us all, because this is talking about our lives. Everybody here has to deal with issues like love, like relationships, like pain, depression, anxiety, loss. None of us are immune to it. So we're not talking about some type of issue that's relevant to a few people somewhere else. This is collective. So how we understand ourselves and how professionals, so to speak, understand us is a matter of our own life and death. And I mean that not just physical death, I mean it in the fullest sense of the word, our welfare of our lives. To me, I'm most passionate about this because this is where I think the heart of everything lies. This is what makes you. Are you going to be a healthy person? You're not going to be a healthy person. Are you going to be a person who spends most of your time fighting demons and fears with a little reserve for some type of productive experience? Or are you going to spend most of your energy in building something and bringing light into the world? It's even hard to estimate. How much time do we spend and how much energy? And I don't just mean quantity, I also mean quality. On all the demons that haunt us. How many things are we doing to compensate for all that, for all our demons, for all our darkness? So looking in and finding answers, therefore, are a real matter of changing dramatically our lives. So the good news I would like to share with you, my friends, is this. I've noticed something very interesting change in the years of my short years in this world so far. Because I've been involved in things like this 30 years almost over 30 years, 40 years almost, 35 years. And I say a very interesting thing. I remember when I started giving this class back in the 80s. So yes, this functionality existed then too. But now it's almost the next generation. You're talking about over 30 years ago. 30 years is a generation. What I mean by generation, the people that were not even born today are 30 years old. 30 years, they're already building their own lives. So it's pretty much of a generation. So anyone my age, more or less, has seen two generations. When I was a kid, and now the next. And let me tell you an observation, a very interesting thing that I see. I do not think that there's higher levels of dysfunctionality than there was then, but there's far more. Number one, a collective sharing of it. Because of technology, everybody knows about much more than we ever knew about everybody else's issues. And it's not just one or two. You're talking about millions of people collectively, whether it's social media, whether it's the emails, whether it's just the speed of how news gets around. That's one. Number two, it's one thing if you're born in a broken family, and your parents were divorced, or you had a loss, or some other abusive or absentee situation where it affected you. It's a whole different thing when you have to start building your next generation, whether you're going to get married or not, whether you're struggling with marriage or finding a soulmate, whether you're struggling with how to build your family. Because now you're no longer just on the receiving end of the previous dysfunctionality. Now are you either part of the problem or part of the solution? Are you perpetuating dysfunctionality or you're not? And the difference I see is that the second generation is not tolerating living unhealthy lives. I see far more receptivity today than ever to healing. Now, obviously, I can't say this is some type of extreme. That's not like in 1980, nobody was receptive to heal. But it's far, far deeper and far more effective today. And I attribute it to these two reasons. Number one is that there's enough people know about something that certain critical masses hit. And number two, it's because as you get older, you start saying, listen, no, I don't want a life like that. And enough is enough. I'll give you an example. A few months ago, I hosted at my table Friday night a whole bunch of students. They were college campuses from around the country. They came for a Shabbos. And you should see how these students are very different than the students in the 60s, for example. Same rebellious spirit, but you don't see them burning flags, you don't see them demonstrating in the streets, it's not anti-war, they're not wearing long hair. Many of them are studying to become lawyers and doctors and other professions. But their rebellion is far more profound, less external. It's far more, they want to build healthy families. Almost consistently, I hear this from a bunch of people. I want to have a healthy family. And you didn't hear that in the 70s and 80s. 70s, 80s was very I want to be free spirit. Now, of course, they'll find people like that too. But I was driving home one Saturday night, I remember, in Manhattan, party night. And I'm driving, so I stopped at a corner by a red light, and I see one of the lines into the clubs. I was just looking at the faces of the young men and women there, all dressed up. On the external, you think they're going to party. Wow, who could envy them? They have no strings attached. They can do whatever they want. They can party all night. I literally felt like wanting to cry. I felt a sadness in their faces. It's all good. They're all going to party. Yeah, the show is good. But I felt a sadness. Like I said, I'd love to see the end of this night. What their faces look like. Are they so... And it was not like even conscious. It was just I sensed this profound loneliness that exists. And I think that is very much more acutely exists today than I've seen. Now, it's a limited perspective, because I'm not talking here 100 years. I'm talking about a generation I've seen grow up. So I see it as and I see from my own work, I see the receptivity to psychological direction is far healthier and far more sophisticated. Now, this doesn't mean it's extreme. It just means it's a sense that I have, and I think it's only going to grow, because, as I said, communication is only growing. So misery loves company. Everybody knows about everybody else's. And secondly, there comes a point. It's all about hitting rock bottom, ultimately. That I don't want to continue this, Even though the known evil is better than the unknown evil and all that type of stuff, and we like our comfort zones. But something? There's something inside of us all that wants some peace. We're not comfortable. We may have made peace with no peace, but it's not like we're exactly embracing it. And I sense it. There's plenty more work to do. When a young woman, someone who's 37 years old tells me she got engaged in the Upper West Side, and she says to me, all my friends feel I betrayed them. I left single life behind. By getting married, I broke, broke this unspoken rule that we're in it together and we're going to be miserable together forever. She says to me, I literally feel like a pariah. I said to her, listen, that's ridiculous. That's their problem, not yours. But she feels like she has to go to therapy because she's now betrayed, and she wants to still maintain her single relationship with them and still have I said, look, if anything, you want to do them all a favor, build a beautiful home with your husband, have children, invite them to your home, and show them the beauty, and figure out how they can do the same. What do you want? Are you kidding me? Something? You want to create a philosophy around a dysfunctional state? It's one thing, I understand, So there's still plenty of necessity of creating a community, of breaking out. But going back to the core discussion about psychology, so I'll tell you, I teach now a class every morning for a number of years now called I Am Bays. It's online on YouTube. Google's storehouses are filled with I Am Bays videos. I don't know, by now it must be thousands, how many hours? It must be hundreds and hundreds of hours. We're waiting. Our office is waiting for a call from Google that you can't put more I Am Bays up because you're taking too much storage space for free. It hasn't happened yet. I guess they got a lot more space than we have to teach. But I'll tell you something. Studying this, especially where I'm last few chapters, the last few months, it's unbelievable stuff about the psyche. He's literally mapping out not just the unconscious. Let's call it the unconscious. I like to use the word supraconscious. What goes on behind the curtain? We know barely what goes on the surface level. What you're doing today. You wake up in the morning, you go to this, your family, children, commutes, work. Even there, some people don't know whether they're coming and going. Okay, fine, but at least it's on a conscious level. What's going on the other side of the curtain? The part of the brain you don't see. Why you make decisions, why you go here, how you satisfy your desires, your needs, your ugly little corners, your darkest crevices of your psyche. There's a whole behind the curtain stuff, and it's an unbelievable map of how that works. Now he talks about it obviously in a healthy sense, but you can get a very good sense of understanding what happens on the surface level by understanding what happens, what makes you tick. So I've gotten this even more than ever before, this passion to somewhat document it in English terms, and I'm collaborating recently with a psychologist at a certain university who actually called me. She's a pretty prominent psychologist. She called me because she had heard that she had read my books and so on, and her words were, "Where psychology ends, Chassidus begins." So she wants to explore it. So it's perfect. That's exactly what I think, and I think that we are at a stage, literally, I think at the threshold of a new age in this regard. And I mean, to me, it's like the implications are tremendous, because we're talking about, yes, creating a better society, and that could be measured. So if therapy has not made things better, it could. And again, I think individually there are people that have definitely been helped. I know people who've gone through very, very traumatic and difficult childhoods and so on, and they've grown through it. Some actually because of therapy, and more actually despite therapy. Frankly, it was always due to the therapy. Sometimes the therapy was there necessary to teach them not to go to therapy, if you know what I mean. They realize that doesn't work, so they have to figure out something else. So maybe that's also worth something. But so there's no question that the power to heal is there, and that there's a formula for it. The formula, just to make a few key critical points, is number one, there is no one formula that fits all. That's not going to happen. Advil or other medications maybe work. Most people take them, they solve certain symptoms. When it comes to the psychological soul, there's certain principles that apply across the board, but application is very different. So the first thing from my perspective is a good therapist has to understand that there's no such thing as one formula. You obviously try certain things until you get there. So it's very personalized, which makes it even more complicated, because most industries don't like personalization. They want to be able to, what they call, scale it. But the human soul can't be scaled, because no soul is the same. And forget about the soul being different, our challenges are different. The way we solve problems are different. The whole makeup, the combination of all our factors, nature, nurture, are just so complicated that you just can't. At the same time, there are principles. A second critical point, and I'm just talking about what I would call Torah-based healthy therapy. A second point is that we are all fundamentally intact. Any damage done, any trauma is always on outer levels. Don't get me wrong, outer doesn't mean so easy to correct, because outer can be, like you could have arteries that have been compromised, even if you have a healthy heart, but you got a big problem, because arteries are the way to the heart. But that type of concept, that the total belief in the ability that we are not damaged goods, that you actually have a soul in the deepest part of you that has not been affected by anything that happened in your life. Knowing that and having confidence in that, to me, is one of the most important power in healing, because that's where empowerment comes in. If you don't really feel that you can become better, you won't. You absolutely won't. Doesn't matter what anyone else thinks, because you don't have the courage and strength inside of you. In Tanya, there's a tremendous concept. He talks about depression, chapter 26, 27, 26. Yeah, he says, what's wrong with depression? Like some say, depression is not a sin, but what depression does is worse than any sin can do. So he says, what depression does is it demoralizes you. And he gives an example. Imagine you're fighting a war with someone, a battle. Let's say wrestling. You're wrestling with another person. And you suddenly feel weak, and you feel you don't have strength to fight. You feel demoralized. You're not in the mood. How is it going to affect you? It's going to affect everything. You may be the most powerful one. You may be far more superior to your adversary. And yet, because you've lost confidence in yourself, or you're down, you won't be able to fight well. So that's what depression does. It's an additional enemy, son. Instead of just fighting with an enemy, now you have another enemy. Your own lack of self-confidence. So he sees depression as that itself is the war. You have to fight that enemy. It's an enemy. It's a real enemy inside of you, a voice that is maybe more powerful than any enemy outside of you, that tells you don't have the strength, that weakens you. So you don't have the resolve, you don't have the strength, your immune system gets weaker, you don't have the confidence, even your own abilities can't really live up to their potential, because you don't feel like you can do it. If you think about it, it's a powerful concept. Now, it's based on a principle, because I've asked a number of therapists, psychologists I know, I said, do you have that confidence in your clients? So they said, how? Not necessarily. Some of my clients have that type of strength. Some I don't see that strength. The Alter Rebbe Tanya doesn't hesitate. Doesn't say some people have, because he believes fundamentally that this divine soul is always there. So once you know, if you know for sure, just to say you may not know for sure, but imagine that you knew that someone sitting in front of you or anyone that you meet has tremendous power. Then obviously that confidence itself would tell you to tell that person, don't buy into your own delusion that you don't have the power. Now, is that alone a solution to it all? Obviously not, because you still need other factors to help you grow and so on. But a key one is you can't go to war if you don't feel confident you can win this war. So that's the point number 2. The first I said was customization. Each individual is different. The second is the absolute belief in the soul's eternal power to heal. So when we say in the morning, Moda Ani, I acknowledge to you, to God, that for returning my soul to me, is the most powerful statement you can make. You're saying no matter what happened yesterday, no matter what will happen today, the soul you've just returned me is yours. And then later we say it's pure, you created it, you shaped it. That means that you basically have absolute confidence and absolute belief that there's a part of you that is immune to any damage, any pain. The question then is, how do you hold on to that? How do you build a bridge to that? And how do you actualize that in your life, which is still dominated by all the other thoughts? But that gives you a fighting chance. So from my perspective, I think every therapist must know this, and this is exactly what they have to keep on doing, no matter what situation. Whoever you are, that if you don't have that adamant commitment, and this is not ambiguous. This is not, let's sit around and talk and let's find out what you're thinking and so on. No, I have something to say to you. I am a therapist. I'm a soul doctor. I tell you have a soul, and your soul is powerful, intact. Now we got to find out how to access it and how to make it real, and how you should believe in it. And that, you know what? The biggest gift is that you never have to come back to me, because you're going to find your own soul. I want to see how many therapists have the courage to say that. There are, by the way, those that do. The real ones, that's exactly what that's their goal. The goal is empowerment, and I don't want to ever see you again, type of thing. But you have to believe that. And I'm not saying it's always self-serving. It's because if you don't believe that a person can reach that type of empowerment, and you think they always need to be dependent, obviously that's you're going to work toward that direction. And then there's the actual map of this psyche, of this soul, which I've discussed at other times, not so much tonight, but this is a whole other topic of what is the map. Now, if any of you have ever seen my book on the Omer, counting of the Omer, that's a small taste of the map. That's on the emotional spectrum of understanding our emotions. Like, in other words, knowledge is power. When you react to something, you're reacting emotionally to something. If you could step back and say, let me analyze how I reacted right now. Someone ticked me off, I reacted like I withdrew. Or the opposite, I attacked. These are emotional tools. So one could be called chesed, one is called gvura, teferes, netzach. So you can actually get a diagnosis of yourself. I mean, the time in the year we do it actively as a mitzvah, it's during the counting of the Omer between Passover and Shavuos. But it's a job all year round work. Someone who got the book called my office and asked whether they could do the counting of the Omer starting Rosh Hashanah. So we said, do it, but just don't make a bracha, Fine. Refining your emotions you can do all year round. As a matter of fact, even all year may not be enough. But the point is, there's a time of year where it's let's call it the core focus, the primary focus. So there is an ability. There's the need. There's what should I say? A step. The first step in any type of healing or growth is getting an assessment, getting a diagnosis, or getting some clarity. Not just acting, but seeing why you're acting or how you're acting. So the question is very simple. If you were to get a diagnosis of your emotional spectrum, well, how does your chesed look like? How does your gvura, teferes, netzach, chayd, yesod, malchus? I'll say it in English. How does your giving look like? Do you give too much? Do you give too little? Do you give in distorted ways? Do you give in healthy ways? I mean, there's a whole list of that. Then there's gvura. How do you withhold? Do you repress too much? Do you repress too little? Teferes. is about empathy, compassion. You have Netzach is about ambition and drive, determination. And here too, some people too much, too little, the wrong way, not balanced enough, etc. Then you have humility, Hoid. And then you have your bonding. Do you bond to things? Problem with commitment, building something. And finally, dignity. All these are 7 emotions that shape every interaction you have. It gets more complicated because it's not just black and white 7, it's 7 times 7. There's the Gvura and Chesed and the Tiferes and Chesed. So each of the 7 have the 7. So if 7 times 7, 49. And if you want to make it even more complicated, also the 49 have another 7 each one. So you have Chesed within Gvura, for example. But let's not even go that far, because the first thing is you got to begin somewhere. If you're going to go into too much a breakdown, it'll become so complicated. So you could, yes, a professional Hasidic soul doctor would be able to look at your interactions and say, your deficiency is in Gvura of Chesed of Hoid. I know that means nothing to you. But if you discussed it more in depth, you could understand what that means. And therefore, the intervention or the solution is, well, not solution per se, black and white solution, but a way of improving it is to exercise that part of your emotional muscles and do so and so. And frankly, every mitzvah in the Torah, it corresponds. There's a book called Sefer Charedim, which actually tells us how every mitzvah corresponds to another limb and faculty in the human body. Their mitzvahs relate to the eyes, to the ears, to the mind, to the heart, to your hands, to your legs, literally, and to different faculties. So you technically can find, by first identifying, for example, the simplest one would be tzedakah. Tzedakah is chesed. A person who doesn't know how to give is not just depriving others what they deserve. You're depriving your own muscle called chesed from functioning. A person who doesn't have graciousness is flawed. Simple as that. I don't want to say flawed. I didn't say damaged goods. Flawed means there's a deficiency there. Today I was just reading a study, psychological study, how gratitude is one of the tools to teach people. Gratitude actually helps them in their psychological state of being. Not a religious study. I could send you a link if you like. Just one example. This discussion is an interesting one. Does gratitude help the soul, or does the soul help you have gratitude? Which way do you begin? Do you begin with gratitude, or do you begin the other way around? Fine. But the point I'm making here is that's a basic principle. Gratitude, saying thank you, appreciating, which is a form of giving. Obviously you're thanking someone who gave you, but I mean to say you're giving back, is very healthy. Now if you think about it, it makes total sense. Does something exist well, healthy in this world that doesn't breathe? Imagine you only inhale and you never exhale. That's like somebody who takes and never says thank you. It's on the psychological soul level. Things have to breathe. So anything that's self-contained and doesn't know how to return is going to be compromised. Then there's the other way around. People are very good at giving, and they're not good at ever taking. That's another issue. So you can literally discover, when you go down the line, you can get a good picture of a person's life. And you'd be surprised, you'd be shocked, I would say, if you really got someone write down for you, or how am I in all these areas? Because it's outside of, when we live it, we don't see it quite the same way. And then you have real suggestions. So, as I said, chesed tzedakah is a simple example. There's also other things and other mitzvahs or actions or behavior, whether it's in thought, speech, or action, that address different type of elements. Now, this is a whole area that you don't hear much about in modern psychology. Why? Because number one, they don't have that type of absolute map to say, you have chesed, this is what you do. You don't have chesed, this is what you don't do. And that's number one. So I understand. On the other hand, what psychology does have, when I mean psychology, I mean secular psychology, it has the bottom-up human search that has found a lot of truths. So what I'm suggesting is, you look in the Torah, you'll find a map, but it hasn't yet been translated, as I said earlier, into a system. A system, you can say, okay, this map, based on this map, here's what we do here and there. Even though, frankly, I think the reason that Jews are still here and they were intact is because, whether they knew it or not, the life structure that the Torah prescribes is actually one that feeds the psyche and the soul of a human being. I'll give you one example, a simple one. You read in the Pirkei Avot, it says, at the end of chapter 1, everyone knows this one, or most people know, on 3 pillars the world stands. The world stands on 3 pillars: Torah, Avoda, Gemilas Chasadim. A literal translation: Torah is Torah, study the body of Torah. Avoda means service, usually referring to either the offerings in the temple or later prayer. And the third is Gemilas Chasadim, which is acts of kindness. Which actually, the mitzvah, by the way, is in this week's Parsha, Mishpatim. That you shall borrow money, lend money, I should say, lend money. And this interesting medrash that says, lending money and do not take interest for it. There's a whole permission how we take interest, because if it's a business thing. But if it wasn't a business transaction, you're not supposed to take interest, because the medrash says an interesting medrash. The whole world is lending to each other. Right? Oxygen gives us oxygen, we give something back to the world. Trees, everything is lending, and no one takes interest, so why would you take interest? That's what the medrash says. Why would you be selfish to take interest? So there's exception if it's a business thing, because a business there's certain rules. But in the natural process of things, we all give and take. You give me something, I give you. Why would I suddenly try to grab more than nature doesn't work that. Nature gives, everything gives and takes, everything breathes. Everything complements each other in a very beautiful mosaic. So this concept of what I was saying, Torah Avodah Gemilas Chasadim. So it sounds simple. Okay, very nice. The entire world stands on study of Torah, serving God, or let's say prayer, Avodah Shebelev, and acts of kindness. Anything deeper than that in here? On the surface level, if you don't think about it, well, I did think about it, but how did I think about it? Because I had to explain this at a class here 25 years ago. And there were people who never heard the word Torah before. They definitely didn't hear the word Avodah. Gemilas Chasadim, everybody knows, acts of kindness. That most people are. And at first someone stands up in the class here and says to me, I understand that the world stands on kindness and graciousness, but what Torah Avodah? How many people in the world even know that it exists? So what do you mean the world stands on it? Good question, right? So of course any scholarly Jew will say, listen, the world doesn't know a lot of things that we Jews know, But it was a very good challenge to me, because it was interesting. People don't even know it. And I said to myself, and I said right there and then, I said to him, no, 1 second. Torah is the mind, Avodah is Belev, is the heart, and Gemilas Chasadim is the actions. The Mishnah is saying a very simple statement. The world stands on a healthy mind, on a healthy heart, and healthy actions. You take one of the 3 away, you don't have a healthy world. And this guy who had never heard the word Torah before, I think he knew that a Sefer Torah, he knew what that was. He didn't know it was like you study Torah or something. And he was extremely impressed. And the truth is, what I said was just simply because he challenged me. If I had also been stuck with those 3 words. This is exactly what the Mishnah is saying. Torah, what is Torah? It's understanding God, what God wants of us. Understanding the obligations, the expectations, the plan. Pnimius Torah would be God's deeper mission for us, the spiritual side of it. Avodah is, it says in the Mishnah, it says in the Talmud, what is Avodah Shebelev? What is service of the heart? Is Avodah. Is Avodah Shebelev? Zui Tefillah. It's the ability to emote, to connect emotionally. Now, any psychologist, anyone will say, of course, mind, heart, actions. The 3 pillars of any type of normal, of a healthy type of life. Because if you only live with your mind and your heart, you don't have actions, it's also equally problematic. Now nothing can stand on 2 legs. The minimum is 3 legs. More solid is 4 legs. But 2 legs is not enough. So the Mishnah is saying 3 legs, these are the 3 minimal pillars, or the 3 key pillars of the world stands on. So how does one build a healthy mind, healthy attitudes, healthy thinking? How does one build healthy feelings? And how does one have healthy actions? And they all feed into each other. Just to show you, on a basic statement like that, written thousands of years ago, it's exactly what it's talking about. Now you'll say, is this my own innovation? I'm reading it into the Mishnah? I don't think so at all, because you start studying it, you start realizing it's exactly what Torah and Avod. What does Torah do? It aligns your mind. Your mind could be thinking in unhealthy ways. It's a way to think in a healthier way. Anyway, the list goes on, and obviously in one class can't discuss the whole psychology of Torah. I wanted to primarily, really, just address the basic principles and open the topic, because I think it's really the last frontier. Because if we can create a healthy society based on healthy mind, healthy heart, healthy actions, and of course all this informed by a healthy unconscious and superconscious, where it all originates from, you have yourself a real blueprint for a better world. Now obviously ultimately comes down to person by person. You can't create something that's just going to change the world. You change people, that's how you change the world. But I think that maybe we could turn our class into a type of laboratory. Any volunteers for the first experiments? No, this will not be any physical experiments. There's no lobotomies. There's no. We're not dissecting anybody. We all do it together. Is an excellent opportunity to really look deeper into the Torah, speak in the language, and see the best we have from psychological models that exist and that work. It can create a tremendous, I think, biggest contribution that maybe for mankind altogether. And now is an opportunity to do so. Hundreds of years ago, the worlds were two apart. The world of Torah existed in one place. The world of science was just being born, modern science. Today's the time. Today we can do it. Something was never able to be done before. So I think it's a historical opportunity. And I'm in, at least. And I just wanted to tell you that I doing whatever I can do, and I feel like I feel like very driven. I feel like I'm 17 years old again, taking on new challenges. In truth is, as I said, I've always been dedicated to doing this, but for some reason I feel a sense of urgency like never before. Maybe because things I'm seeing, maybe, whatever it is. And this is not a sign of pre-retirement. Please don't see it that way. On the contrary, it's a whole new career. It's not a new career for me. The point I want to make is I'm not just trying to tell you, I'm not here to advertise, I'm not announcing my candidacy or something. I'm really just saying it as an invitation to join together. And any insights you have on this matter, thoughts, critique, please. And in the next few weeks, I've already launched something more for more for the inner religious community, but I want to do some other things that really start taking Torah Hasidic thought and applying it to real life situations. And again, anything you would like to contribute in any way to this, ideas, thoughts, any other things, please, by all means. I see this as an effort that is a collective effort, and I think I don't know if there's any more noble things that can be done in helping our situation. Obviously, let's not be naive. There are short-term challenges that have to be dealt with. We have to get out of the line of fire, deal with immediate symptoms. But long-term, for ourselves and for our children and for the community, it's about really developing psychological modalities that work. And the most exciting part for me is, as I've quoted Frederick Douglass, who you may have heard of. Well, he was one of the first emancipated slaves and wrote, here's a great line. He says that's far easier, I don't remember the exact expression, but the idea is it's infinitely easier to bring up a healthy child than to fix a broken adult. And when I read that, it struck me, because I've been involved my whole life fixing broken adults. Don't get me wrong, I don't want that to come across like I'm the fixer or something. But that's why I've been involved with, working with adults. And it's true. The same, the bang for your buck. For the hour of working with one child, you get far better results than fixing a broken adult. Not because adults aren't good people, because you're fixing something that's already embedded. It's years and years. And so I was not surprised that suddenly it dawned on me that that's what the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, what did he do till he was 36? 36 is when he revealed himself, as the expression goes. He was told time has come to allow people. He was a complete unsung hero. Complete secret. a tzaddik nister, as they call it, a hidden tzaddik. What did he do? You don't believe what he did. You'd think he was sitting and studying Kabbalah and teaching it to secret groups. He was not only not a school teacher, he was an assistant. He would walk children to school. He basically the equivalent of a bus driver. And he would walk children to school and talk to them, sing with them, tell them stories, infuse them with a healthy attitude to God. He'd give them a candy, make a blessing. He infused them with a healthy approach to God, to soul. Think about it. This is reality to me. No cameras, no glamour. He knew where it's at. He was shaping young children, because that's how you shape generations. And but the bottom line is, I came to realize, okay, am I going to become a school teacher or a bus driver? It'd be nice. It would be nice for a book. I don't know if I could bring myself to do it. I don't know, just me from the ego point of view. It's not exactly like what I'm. But I thought to myself, maybe that's exactly what I should do. I mean, not that I love you guys and so on, but I would. But then I said to myself, the problem is to get to the children, you got to go through the broken adults, because the adults control the children. So how are you going to get to these children? Obviously you could be a bus driver and stuff like that. It's true. So then I said to myself, maybe I'm just trying to justify what I'm doing. I don't want to get out of my comfort zone. Anyway, just showing you my own neurotic processing, a little group therapy here. The bottom line is I'm still here. So I haven't yet chosen that guy. But I definitely understand and value it, and I really realize there's no question the healthiest thing we can do is make sure the next generation is healthier than we are. And I don't mean that as some type of like last will or legacy. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just, thinking in terms of where the real impact, because that's where you have an impact. Because children are completely, at the youngest of age, are freshly fallen snow. Completely dependent on what we're going to do in shaping them. Unbelievable if you think about it. And the question is, what do we do? Unfortunately, once the honeymoon is over, so to speak, once you get over, our children suddenly become products of us instead of we learning from them. So it's something to think about. But at the same time, I don't see it mutually exclusive. I think it's a collective effort where we have to speak to adults and give them, because I see adults, when they hear a blueprint, you hear a template, a backdrop of a healthier life, people relate to it. We all know, we can all break down and cry like children. Tell us something true, resonates, something that touches you like your child in you, and it brings you back. So only difference between us and our children are years, and of course not only years, the wear and tear that has jaded us or shaped us. But I firmly believe you can reach both. But it's true, it's harder to fix someone who's already fixed. I don't say the word fix. It's harder to reconnect to who you really are once you've so-called wandered away and created a new reality of what you think you are, than someone who's never been shaped in the first place. It's far easier to shape a warm ball of wax than a hardened ball of wax, obviously. But it's still possible. So all I'm really saying is that I'm gratified to be able to do what I do. And I see, and again, I want to make sure it's clear, I'm not speaking any type of us, me versus you type of situation. I think we're all in the same boat. And each of us needs our own healing in our own different way, and we give and take from each other. I believe I've learned a lot more from my students than they've learned from me. I sincerely believe that. Maybe in a different way. Sometimes you learn information, but sometimes you learn there's other things than information. There's reality, there's empathy, there's the dignity of the human journey. I've learned that in ways that impossible that I would ever have learned it from a book or from my own life. So I want to thank you and everybody that has ever been part of this journey, and hopefully continue for many healthy years, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, and that we should do whatever we can to, as I said in the beginning, to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And it's only those two options, by the way. So it's pretty stark, pretty black and white. And that means either you're going to be influencing yourself and others in a positive way, or, God forbid, the other. I don't want to mention the other option. I have no doubt that everybody wants to be a source of light and warmth to everyone you meet. Nobody wants to be giving off darkness and coldness. But sometimes we do it because we don't have a choice, or we don't even know what we're doing. We're not even aware. So Our goal here is to join together to become agents, ambassadors of light and of warmth into the world, especially on a cold night like this. Thank you very much, everyone. Philip will be giving his class tomorrow evening, and Philip is not giving his class tomorrow evening. Sorry, he's not. And we will continue this journey as we go. Any way that you guys want to contribute or tell me any ideas you have, please email me or contact us at meaningfullife.com. And it's been an honor. Thank you.